So we're going to continue our discussion of business history from a management or business critic's perspective with the ancient world. Now, of course, when we say ancient world, what I'm referring to in this case is ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And it's amazing to think about it, but ancient Greece and ancient Rome didn't really have a lot of business, and they didn't have a lot of industry. In fact, these were predominantly agricultural civilizations. In fact, we might call them, what we call for our vocabulary term for this section, is an agrarian society. And an agrarian society is one where an agrarian society is one that is based largely on agriculture. And it's amazing to think about those massive Roman armies, those massive Greek armies, the beautiful sculptures at the Agora, the Coliseum, all these great wonders of the ancient world were essentially built on the backs of farmers. It's pretty neat to think about it. Now, certain philosophers that lived during the time of the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans generally thought that profit-seeking was a bad thing, and it led to excess, corruption, and misery. And let's be honest, if you ever saw how some of the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans lived, the Romans especially, you would be appalled at how and what some of their wealthy members of society did. I mean, you think about one of the greatest Roman delicacies, that was known as sparrow tongue pie. And the idea was that if you could manage to cut that many tongues out of sparrows and waste those sparrows, you obviously had a lot of money. It's not that sparrow tongues taste particularly good, it was just a way of showing off that you could waste all that food. Romans, when they had parties, would eat themselves into excess. They had a room in many villas called a Vomitorium, where you would eat so much that you would just go and vomit it all up, and then you would go back and start eating again. I mean, it's not a surprise that philosophers were appalled by the behavior of many of their wealthier citizens. Maybe if you'd like to, maybe a little bit of a pop culture reference, watch that TV show Spartacus, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Those rich people, in many ways, seemed evil in the ancient Roman Empire. Now, Plato, of course, says that these appetites are for greed and excess and corruption are in everyone, and they are somewhat insatiable, but they could sort of be controlled if those individuals pursued inner virtue. Other philosophers like Aristotle said, well, some profit-seeking is okay as long as it's only used in more almost like a subsistence manner for acquiring basic needs for everyday use. And of course, Marcus Aurelius, who was probably one of the best emperors and Roman generals that ever lived, always said that you acquire inner virtue through prayer, not through the acquisition of wealth. And it's particularly interesting that Marcus Aurelius would say this. When you think about in ancient Rome, emperors were treated not as political rulers, but they were treated as divine entities. They were treated as like gods. I mean, this was the embodiment of the undifferentiated individual ontology. You know, what Marcus Aurelius could have wanted, anything he could have imagined, was at his fingertips. And yet he chose to give all that up to live as a general in the battlefronts of Germania. So he was getting rained on, snowed on, sloshing around the mud, living a generally, in my opinion, miserable and stoic life. So for the fact that an emperor could give all those things up and pursue that inner virtue through stoic philosophy and prayer is really quite a statement. But I encourage you to take just a step back and ask yourself, why would the philosophers say that? Is there maybe some sort of an ulterior motive? Well, you have to think about it. The average Roman and Greek citizen lived a very miserable life. Most average Romans and Greeks did not have a lot of possessions. I mean, think of that movie 300, for example. Do you think those Spartans in that 300 movie had a lot of possessions? Of course not. They didn't have shirts or pants, right? So having philosophers say that, I know that it seems like a good thing to have all that money and live that excess, but it's actually not a good thing, is kind of a way to placate the masses. By saying that all that wealth those other people have is not really worth anything, and you can lead a more wholesome life not through wealth but by prayer or inner virtue, and that's a more preferable choice. That can give those extremely impoverished people some degree of peace of mind. Of course, that's just my particular theory. You're free to agree or disagree with me. But either way, in the ancient world, the pursuit of profit was generally seen as something negative. So in our next video, we're going to talk about business critics from a medieval perspective. I'll see you then.